Welcome back to our continued coverage of the war on Gaza. Some of the latest developments for you now. Israeli tanks and troops are pushing deeper into Gaza on day 11 of the military offensive. Israeli tank shells adding to strikes from planes and warships. Among the targets has been a UN school, which was being used as a civilian shelter. Medics in Gaza say 593 people are dead, some 2,800 injured. Relief agencies say the casualties include a growing number of civilians, including children. 9 Israelis have been killed, 6 of them soldiers, including 3 from an Israeli tank shell. Israeli ground forces are closing in on Gaza's second biggest city of Khan Yunis in the south of the Strip. A 5-year-old boy was killed there when a tank shell hit a house. An update now from Gaza City, live to Ayman Mohideen. Ayman.
Kamal, in the past hour or so, there seems to have been a lull in the fighting, but certainly let that not deceive you, because we know over the past 11 days at any given point, a barrage of bombardment can begin at any point and certainly intensify. In fact, all across the northern front, it seems to be relatively quiet for the time being. We know the Israeli military has pushed in and around some of the major population centers in the northern part area. That saw some of the intense fighting yesterday. East Jabalia was the scene of some very heavy clashes. Also Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun. In the southern part, the Israeli military has also moved in after a night of very heavy shelling near Gaza, which is on the eastern part of Khan Yunis, and certainly there ground forces are also making a push. So certainly the military offensive still ongoing, still very much pushing deeper and deeper into the Gaza Strip. On a humanitarian front, Kamal, the situation continues to worsen by the hour, with UN officials describing it as a dire and disastrous situation here, Kamal.
Ayman, explain something to me, if you can, on the infrastructure front. We were talking earlier about how 75% of the Strip is without power now, and behind you half an hour ago or an hour ago there was that great big plume of smoke from what we thought was a fuel depot. Does this mean now that fuel supplies are under threat? Is there any fuel coming in? Because that would be what's, I suspect, very much needed if electricity is all out.
Well, absolutely. In fact, there were plans to let fuel in today, but still no confirmation on whether the Israeli military put any fuel into that Nahal Oz fuel terminal, which is the main fuel terminal. The important thing to keep in mind, though, is fuel and electricity drive so much of the infrastructure here, not simply for personal individual consumption, but when you look at things like running water, that requires pumps. Pumps require electricity. Electricity obviously requires fuel. So the power lines from Israel into Gaza, as we've been reporting, there are 3 different sources of electricity for the people of Gaza. That which is generated by the Gaza power plant itself. There are also the power lines that run from Israel into Gaza, and that from Egypt into the southern part of the Strip. 6 out of the 10 power lines from Israel have already been damaged as a result of the airstrikes and the bombardment. 1 out of the 2 main lines from Egypt has already been destroyed as a result of the Israeli bombardment, and there has been no fuel, so the power plant in Gaza has completely shut off. So not only are 500,000 people living in the northern part of Gaza without electricity now for more than at least 3 to 4 days, but so much of the infrastructure is completely now at a standstill, because if there's no electricity to generate, if there's no fuel to generate electricity, which can then operate the power pumps, there's no clean running water for the people. There's no sanitation system. Sewage is just being dumped in the sea. So you get a sense of how everything here is interconnected. One thing has a spillover effect on another and another. Hospitals also feeling the pinch of that shortage of fuel and electricity, because they have now been running on backup generators for well over 48 hours, and that's not what those generators are meant to do. They're supposed to be sporadic uses, intermittent uses, not to sustain the capacity of a full medical complex for 48 hours non-stop. In fact, the United Nations has been... And there, Kamal, you can certainly hear that the shelling's still ongoing, so that moment of lull already shattered by that piercing sound. But as I was saying,
how close was that to you, just out of interest? I mean, as you turn around, how close would you say that was to you there?
Well, we're about 4 kilometers, 5 kilometers away from the north of the Gaza Strip, Gaza City, that is. So certainly it gives you a sense that it must have been within that 4-kilometer area, but also we're about 3 kilometers from the border. So certainly very, very close to where we are, but not necessarily. In fact, I think we can pan over and show you where it is. It's on the... Absolutely. that black cloud there rising, certainly the sound that we just heard, obviously something is burning. When you see the black smoke rising, something has actually caught on fire. Generally, when it's just a white cloud of smoke that rises, often an Israeli airstrike. But not sure whether that sound that we just heard was that of artillery shelling or not. But the skies of Gaza have been relatively quiet for some time, suggesting that it may not have been an airstrike, Kamal.
Sure. OK, Eamon, we're going to leave it there just for now. Thanks for that update, Eamon Mohideen, live in Gaza. As we reported a little earlier, a UN school was hit a bit earlier on Tuesday. It was being used to house Gazan refugees. A little earlier, our correspondent Alan Fisher spoke to Captain Doron Spielman of the Israeli army, asked him about that incident.
The killing or the targeting of civilians is never justifiable. And of course, we're not targeting civilians. We also know there was a loss of Israeli troops last night, and that loss was caused also because the difficulty in operating in an area where Hamas are shooting rockets from civilian populations. The basis and root of the problem behind this war is that the attack on the Israeli civilian population is coming from militants who've embedded themselves in the civilian population. We're trying to respond, but we have to understand, this is a war, this is a battle. In a battle, nothing is 100%. There are civilian casualties, and the key to stopping those civilian casualties is stopping the blood-wrenching that Hamas is inflicting both on Palestinians and Israelis.
Captain, it's a school that's being used as a UN shelter.
Yes.
This is a UN building. Mm-hmm. Isn't that a breach of international law? Haven't you just committed an act of a breach of international law?
This is, in fact, we did not target this UN building, which is why it's upholding international law. No country can post a record like Israel in terms of keeping civilian casualties out of the picture in an urban warfare where the enemy's embedded themselves and is shooting rockets from these areas. We have to understand, this is a con game. This is a con game being carried out by Hamas. They're shooting at us from civilian centers, and when we respond in the area of civilian centers, they say, oh, breach of international law. The breach occurred 11 days ago when the rockets intensified over the Israeli population, when we decided to come into Gaza to prevent years and years of squandering the rights of the Israeli civilian population. The end to this is in the hands of Hamas.
Captain, there'll be people watching this saying, how often will the Israelis use the "we weren't targeting them" to justify the death of now hundreds of civilians? The United Nations says of the more than 500 that have been killed, 20% are women and children. That's more than 100 innocent victims here.
I'm a father. The death of a civilian, I look at the men and women, I look at the children, I think of my own family. Israelis, we're a small country, we value our own life, and we value the life of the Palestinian population, which is why we never wanted this to come out in the first place, which is why we pulled out of Gaza 3 years ago. When we pulled out of Gaza, wrenching our own people out of this place, it was so that they could start a better life. Instead of investing this money in universities and in hospitals, they put it into bombs, which are now falling on Israel. And unfortunately, the response to that is in hitting the Hamas leadership and their militancy, which are based around civilians. To stop civilian casualties on both sides, the decision is in the hands of Hamas, period.
So, of course, thousands of Gazans forced from their homes by this conflict, some of them being housed in that school there. And with the strip surrounded, the crossings closed, there is no way for any of them to get out. Many have sought refuge in makeshift shelters, but as Shireen Tadros reports, even there is little relief.
They fled the front lines of this war, knowing that Israel's assault would follow them. In Gaza, nowhere is safe and nobody is immune from the onslaught. There are hundreds of refugees now living in makeshift shelters like this one in Gaza City. 13,000 have already been driven from their homes, according to the United Nations. Noha left her home on the outskirts of the strip with her husband and 3 children. Her youngest, Marwa, hasn't been changed in 3 days. The milk she's drinking is the last bottle Noha has for her.
I want to tell people outside to do something. Why is this Palestinian blood so cheap to you? Why are our neighbours living in peace but we are deprived of that? What have the children done to deserve this? Why should my daughter drink milk from a dirty bottle? She won't even take it anymore. What did we do wrong? They bring us some milk, a blanket. We don't want it. We want to go home and eat and sleep and live like everyone else.
مش عايزينها، عايزين نرجع لبيوتنا نشتغل وناكل ونشرب ونعيش احنا زي ما بقيت الأمة عايشة.
Where is the great Arab world?